Well, we're now joined by the man who took that decision, the President of Iceland, Olafur Grimsson. President, thank you so much for coming on the show. Now, you vetoed the IceSafe depositor bill. When are you going to live up to your international obligations?
Well, I didn't veto it. That's a misconception. There is no such veto in the Icelandic constitution. The act has in fact come into force. What I did was to allow the nation to have a referendum to make the final decision. And it's completely wrong, as was hinted in the introduction, that Iceland is running away.
So why put it to a referendum and not decide, let this agreement go ahead as initially planned with your government?
Because, like in many European countries where the Maastricht Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty and the other obligations have been put to national referendums, like in France, the Netherlands, in Ireland and the Nordic countries, our democratic constitutions allows the people through a referendum to have a final say. So this is a European democratic process that we are also honoring here in Iceland. We are not running away from the obligation. Let me make this absolutely clear. Iceland is not running away from the obligations. The law which I signed in September and is in force is based on the principle that Iceland acknowledges its responsibilities and obligations based on agreement with Britain and the Netherlands. What is simply taking place here is a democratic process.
But essentially, will the UK and the Netherlands get their money back in full?
Well, of course, as I told you before, the existing law is based on the agreement between Britain and the Netherlands. And what is happening in Iceland is, according to our constitution, that the people who are going to carry the burden, who are going to pay with their taxes in the future, will have the final say. But in no way is Iceland running from the obligations.
Sir, exactly like us taxpayers in England are paying for our obligations, what happens if a referendum in your country says no?
Well, what happens then is that the law which I signed in September, and based on this agreement we reached with Britain and the Netherlands last summer, will then be enforced. And that law is based on the fundamental principle that Iceland honors its obligations.
So are you not concerned that the IMF will actually stop you accessing the funds that have been made available to you so far?
Well, as the leadership of the IMF has stated, there is no connection between the democratic process in Iceland, which is now taking place, and the position of the IMF. In fact, the IMF program has been working very well. That's good for the IMF, it's good for Iceland, and there's absolutely no connection between the two.
How can you say that Fitch's downgrade of Iceland's government bonds to junk has no significance?
Well, first of all, this rating agency that did that, Fitch, has a lot to answer for, because its rating in the last 2 or 3 years has turned out to be completely wrong. And in fact, also, this doesn't really have any practical implications whatsoever. And I thought it was rather strange that only a few hours after my decision, without taking into consideration many of the other elements, this rating agency issued this statement. And by the way, that was the same rating agency that gave the Icelandic banks in 2007 and 2008 top marks. And we here in Iceland were perhaps foolish enough to think that was a respectable agency, but it turned out to be completely wrong.
President Grimsson, thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg.
Thank you very much.